everybody, I'm Bill Sanders, and this is Watch Art Sci, the art and science of watch collection. Today, I want to take a look at a watch company that is like really two watch companies in one. On the one hand, you have some very high-end watches, and on the other hand, you have some standard horology. So let's get started. I'll tell you how I came into this. I was looking at an article in Monochrome magazine, and they talked about 5 high-end German watches. And they had a Lange und Söhne, Langenhain, Moritz Grossmann, Tutima, and Glashütte Original. Well, I looked at that. I had to sort of go back. It was called Tutima, and I'd heard of Tutima, but I never thought of it as a high-end watch company. So I thought, well, I better find out something about it. So I had about a couple of weeks ago, I guess, it hadn't been very long, I was in Dresden visiting Rolf Lang. And one of the first things I found out was, I think it was back around 2009, 10, 11, right around in there, Tutima hired Rolf Lang to bring him up to speed. And he put together what is called the Tutima Homage minute repeater. It was a homage from an earlier time. And the movement that came out of that, it was a caliber 800. Now, this watch was everything included in it from scratch. A minute repeater, that was no small feat. Now, here's what happened after that, which I think is really very interesting. The movements that became the in-house movements of Tutima were based on this minute repeater, based on the 800. And what they did was the opposite of what most watch companies do. Most watch companies will have sort of a base or a series of bases, and then they add things to it for different functions. What Tutima did, which I thought was really interesting, was that they started with the minute repeater. And they said, okay, well, we'll just take off of here what we don't need. And they started with the small seconds, and so they had the hour and the minute and the small seconds. And they called that the 617. And then they took, again, from the 800, they came up with another one for power reserve, and then finally another one for dual time. And so here you have this movement that had originally been one of the most complex, sophisticated movements in mechanical watchmaking, the minute repeater. Okay, so that's sort of like, oh boy, not only was that high end, that was a really interesting stuff going on. Now, it turned out that they, at least for the what I'll call the 600 series, the 17, 18, and 19, they came out with a watch called the Patria. And the Patria there were 4 basic models. 2 of the models were pretty much the same. It was called the small seconds. Now, one of them that was made in stainless steel with a blue dial, they called the Admiral Blue. Okay, and this was priced at 4,900 euro. And hey, that's not bad. I mean, under 5,000 euro for something that's based on it's sort of the opposite base. Well, instead of basing it on the lowest, you're basing it on the highest. Now, the other ones were priced pretty much on what you'd expect for gold watches of this nature, of this quality. So they had one, they called it the small seconds, and that was 16,000 euro. Then they had another one called the Power Reserve. These are the names they use. They have a Power Reserve on it in the small seconds. They call that a Power Reserve. And you can see that one, the one that is power reserve at 9 o'clock. It's a little, tell you how much you wind up. By the way, too, all of these were hand wound, which is my favorite. I really like them a lot. All right, and then finally they had the dual time. This was the most expensive. This one was 17,842, and so it was. I mean, again, not a bad price. Really, all of these are under 20,000, but still pretty much up there. Now, they also came up with something else that was really very, very interesting. They had originally, and they go back to the 19th century, that Tutima does. And so they're an old company, and what happened, of course, you got 2 world wars, and then you had they were under the Soviets, and then when they had the reunification, they went back to Glashütte. They didn't do it right away like A. Longa, but they took their time, and they did go back there. Now, one of the earlier movements they had was called the Tutima caliber T659. All right, and it was one of the very few chronograph calibers that was made in Glashütte. So this was something I said, well, and they say, well, look, what we want to have is that we want to have something with a flyback function, which in German was the Timpestop. And so that was the next one they made. Again, this is on the high end of Tutima. And so what the flyback does is you can push a button and then reset it by pushing the button again. It's sort of like a toggle. And so this was another watch. They had, so it wasn't just that they had some high-end watches. They had some really seriously interesting high-end watches. They had the minute repeater, they had the Timpestop, and then they derived from the minute repeater there's Patria, all of the movements in their Patria. So this was one half of Tutima. Now the other half of Tutima is pretty much what you see in a lot of companies that put out a standard horology watch. Basically, they design a watch, they add a sort of a standard movement to it, usually an ETA or Solita or something like that. Now, the one thing that I'm not crazy about that Tutima did, a lot of them do, they have these other names they had, and they talked about it, that they did something to them that they were very proud of. Germany's equivalent to COSC testing is called the DIN 8319. And so they put them through that testing to bring them up to COSC standards. Now, they did this with cased watches. I don't know what the arguments are for that, but it would seem that if the watch is cased, you probably get a more accurate idea of how it's going to perform, as opposed to just with the movement, but that's neither here nor there. All right, so let's take a look at the different models they have. And the first one that they have is called the M2, and they have 3 different types of M2. The most popular movement they have is called the Tutima 330, which is based on an ETA 2836. And of the main types of M2, there's 2 of them have that. Now, another one they have is a Valjoux 7750. It's based on that, and they call it the Tutima 521, and whatever else they do with it. Now, the prices are, this is a pretty decent sort of spread of prices. The $5,900 chronograph M2 is it's in a titanium case, and the titanium case for this is sort of at the very much of the high end. Now, you can find other chronographs with the Valjoux 7750 that are a lower price, that are in stainless steel, but this is sort of gives you a better idea of the range. They have one called the Seven Seas, and they have another one called the Coastline. So this is sort of the Maritime. I think that's what the M and M2 is for, and different kinds of models. Now these models, the two that they have here, the Seven Seas and Coastline, they have the date, and one the Seven Seas has a bezel with a diver-like indicators on it. The other one is, pretty much of an office watch. And again, they're relatively inexpensive. The next group is called the Saxon One, and the Saxon One is, I think they have more models in the Saxon One than any other, and also price-wise, they got a real range of prices. At the upper end, they have one that's has a Tutima 521 in it, which is really in this case a value 7750. This one, the Saxon One, this particular one is in steel with a steel bracelet and so forth. That's a nice watch. You get a chronograph out of it. The Saxon 1M has the Tutima 330, which is the ETA 2836, and that's 2350. Now that's a little higher than the M2 versions. Now they also have two different women's versions. One's called the Saxon One Lady, and the other one is called the Saxon One Lady S. The Lady S is quartz, so I left it out. This has a Tutima 340, which is some kind of ETA-based movement, but I couldn't figure out which one it was. And at the higher end, this particular one has a mother of pearl dial base to it, and a colored gator strap, and it's a nice one. Now this was $6,100. Now the other ones they have, they're much less. I think they start maybe around $1,600. So you have a real range with the women's watches, and then you have a whole other set of women's watches that are quartz. All right, this next group is probably the one that Tutima is best known for, and this is the Grand Flieger. And there are three models of that. Now the reason that the Flieger is Fliegers for pilot's watch is that they really made Flieger watches for the German Air Force, and so there was some collectors. The Flieger is a very popular one. Pilots popular. I used to fly. It looks good to me. Now here, the one they have three models. One's called the Flieger Classic. One's called the Airport, and one's called the Automatic. These the range of what they offer is really pretty good. The Flieger Automatic over on the far right, the green one, they start at like $1,300, and this particular one with the metal bracelet is around $1,600. Gorgeous looking watch. This came out in 2019. And then you have the Flieger Airport, which is what I call an office watch. And then you have the chronograph 320 at $5,500. And it has sort of like the beaded bracelet on it. And so the Flieger, given the price of the Flieger, given the fact that Tutima really made real Air Force watches, Flieger watches for the German Air Force, they tend to be the most popular of Tutima. They're very good for the bottom line too, I might add, because they're very reasonably priced and really well designed watches, in my opinion, of course. All right, now this last one, I think this is relatively new. I'm pretty sure it is, called Sky, and Sky. They're all the same, except for they have different colors. There's only three models, and you have blue, green, and sort of a maroon color. They're all $1,750. They all come on the Milanese bracelet, They're 41 millimeter, and they all have the Tutima 330, the ETA 2836. So here is something. It is a very interesting company. I mean, it's sort of like, imagine this: Patek Philippe had two divisions. one was what you usually see when you have Patek Philippe, and the other one says, well, look, we need something that these guys can afford, so we're going to have Patek Philippe's, and they're going to have ETA movements in it. And I thought, and then we're going to make them out of steel and titanium instead of gold. And then they have the regular Patek Philippe watches. And Tutima has, at least that was sort of the sense they made out of it. Here you've got this company that's got two different divisions in it that are totally different. Not only in the models and so forth, and certainly in the prices, but in the quality of watches they have. And that I find very interesting and very different, very, very much of a surprise. I thought Tutima was just sort of made inexpensive watches, but relatively speaking, but they don't. They have some really interesting levels of quality, and I tell you, they live in different parts of the horological universe. Here you have high horology and then standard horology, and there's nothing in between. All right, well, listen, as always, I'd love to hear what you guys have to think about these watches, something that you might consider in your collection, and any ideas that you have about this. And until Sunday, when we have our collection review, this is Bill Sanders for Watch Art Sci, the art and science of watch collection.